Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, Ibu Khairunisa Arifah, Ibu Dian Kartika Rahajeng, and Ibu Dewi Ulansari. My name is Revy Fahrezi. I'm from the Accounting Department of the IUP program. Today, I'll present my thesis defense, which is entitled The Relationship Between Tax Attitudes and Tax Structure Towards Tax Compliance Behavior of Small-Medium Enterprises in Indonesia. Let's get started. This is the outline of the presentation. Moving on. Now let's start with the introduction. We will begin with the background of this study. Tax is considered to be one of the most important sources of revenue for the government. The tax revenue gained from taxpayers are allocated to fund government's expenditures and public services. Since SMEs make up for around 60% of the gross domestic product, or the GDP, it is important for the government to ensure that SMEs pay their taxes. The figure on the left shows the tax ratio of ASEAN countries in 2018. Tax ratio is the comparison between the tax revenue and the GDP of a country. And as you can see from the figure, Indonesia has the second lowest tax ratio compared to other countries in Southeast Asia. This indicates that the tax compliance level in Indonesia is still relatively low compared to other ASEAN countries. Because SMEs make up for around 60% of the national GDP, their increased levels of tax compliance behavior could also increase the state revenue and thus improving public services like healthcare, education, transportation, and etc. These are the three objectives of this research. The first is to examine the relationship between tax attitudes towards tax compliance behavior of SMEs in Indonesia. The second objective is to examine the relationship between tax structure towards tax compliance behavior of SMEs in Indonesia. And the last objective is to investigate whether there are any specific characteristics that influences tax compliance behavior among SMEs. Now let's continue with the literature review. This study is based on a tax compliance model created by Fisher, Wartic, and Mark in 1992. Tax attitudes and tax structure derive from this model, with tax attitudes consisting of fairness and peer influence, while tax structure consists of complexity, penalties, and tax rate. The demographic variables and non-compliance opportunity aspects will act as the business characteristics of this study. These are the list of several previous studies that have applied Fisher's tax compliance model in investigating tax compliance behavior. Basically, Fisher's tax compliance model has been used for conducting tax compliance researches all around the world, such as Indonesia, Netherlands, New Zealand, Malaysia, Yemen, USA, Ethiopia, and etc. Based on Fisher's model, this study has formulated a theoretical framework, which is represented by this figure. And as stated in the theoretical framework, this study has developed 5 hypotheses that investigates whether the aspects of tax attitude and tax structure has a significant effect on tax compliance behavior. Moving on to the research methodology. The type of research this study has conducted is a quantitative research, which uses primary data collected from online-based questionnaires. The methods used to analyze the data are the descriptive analysis, the classical assumption test, and the multiple regression test. But before conducting the main survey, this study has proposed to conduct a pilot study in order to test the validity and reliability of the questionnaire items. This pilot study has gathered 29 respondents to act as that sample. This is the result of the validity test. By cross-referencing the R table with the number of sample, the critical value is 0.3673 with a 5% significance level. The obtained value of each of the questionnaire items has a range between 0.665 to 0.906. Since all of the obtained value of the questionnaire items are above the critical value, we can conclude that all of the questionnaire items are valid. Next is the result of the internal consistency reliability test. The results show that all of the constructs of this study has a Cronspach alpha above 0.7, which states that all of the constructs are considered reliable. Next, we will discuss regarding the data analysis. This is the outline of the data analysis. After conducting the main survey, this study has gathered as much as 103 respondents. The data was first analyzed using a classical assumption test, which consists of a normality test, a multicollinearity test, and a heteroscedasticity test, and an autocorrelation test. After the classical assumption test, this study conducted an intercorrelation test, followed by a multiple regression test, which consists of a t-test and an f-test. This figure represents the result of the normality test. As you can see from the figure, the dots are more or less following the diagonal line, which states that the data is normally distributed. This table represents the result of the multicollinearity test. Based on the results table, all of the independent variables obtain a tolerance value above 0.1 and the VIF value below 10. This concludes that the independent variables are free of any multicollinearity. This figure shows the result of the heteroscedasticity test. Based on the figure, the dots are spread randomly without any usual patterns, which state that the regression model is free of any heteroscedasticity. Next is the result of the autocorrelation test. The results show that the Durbin-Watson value is 2.013. Based on the Durbin-Watson table, the DU for the study is 1.7818, which makes 4 minus DU equal to 2.2182. Since the Durbin-Watson value of the study is 2.013, which is between 1.7818 and 2.2182, we can conclude that the data is free of any autocorrelation. Next is the intercorrelation test. According to the table, all of the independent variables show a significant Pearson correlation value with the dependent variables. Moving on to the multiple regression analysis. This table represents the results of the t-test. Based on the table, it shows that fairness, peer influence, and complexity has a significance level below 0.05. This states that hypothesis 1A, hypothesis 1B, hypothesis 2A is accepted. However, penalties and tax rate show a significance level above 0.05, which means that hypothesis 2B and hypothesis 2C is rejected. Next, we will examine the results of the f-test. The results show that the significance level is below 0.05. This means that simultaneously, all of the independent variables have a significant influence towards the dependent variables. The last part of the multiple regression analysis is the determinant coefficient summary. Based on the table, it states that the R-square value is 0.316. This means that all of the 5 independent variables simultaneously have a significant effect of 31.6% in predicting the dependent variable. Finally, we have reached the conclusion of this study. The results of the data analysis confirm that tax attitudes, which consist of fairness and peer influence, has a significant effect on determining the tax compliance behavior of SMEs. These results are in line with several previous studies that have also stated that the equity of exchange relationship between taxpayers and the government, and also the influence of taxpayer associates, have shown a significant influence in determining tax compliance behavior. The only aspect of tax structure that has shown a significant impact in determining the tax compliance behavior of SMEs is complexity. This result is in line with other previous studies which state that the complexity level of tax systems and tax regulation has a direct effect in determining compliance behavior. However, the other aspects of tax structure, mainly penalties and tax rate, do not show any significant influence in determining the tax compliance behavior of SMEs. In terms of penalties, there is a possibility that it is because SMEs are rarely penalized due to them having a low probability of being audited by the tax authorities. This makes SMEs less fearful of the tax penalties, as long as they pay their taxes and do not resort to tax avoidance. Regarding tax rate, perhaps it is because SMEs do not pay their taxes based on the issued tax rate, rather they pay based on how much they want to pay. So basically it's probably because SMEs already have a fixed amount of funds they want to levy, regardless of the tax rate. Although not all the independent variables partially show a significant impact in determining tax compliance behavior, all of the aspects of tax attitudes and tax structure simultaneously show a significant effect, as much as 31.6% in predicting the tax compliance behavior of SMEs. The other 68.4% is probably determined by other aspects that are not mentioned within this study, like cost of compliance, social norms, personal norms, etc. An intercorrelation analysis was conducted between tax compliance behavior and the business characteristics of SMEs to investigate their relationship. The results show that business characteristics, mainly the age and educational attainment of the owner, the corporate business age, and the level of revenue, has shown no significant correlation with tax compliance behavior. There are several limitations that this study has formulated. The first limitation is that the respondents of the study are mainly SMEs, hence it can't be generalized for enterprises of all sizes. The second limitation is that the sample of the study is only limited to 103 respondents. This might not represent all types of SMEs operating in Indonesia. The reason is because there are so many types of SMEs in Indonesia. The third limitation is that the constraints of tax attitudes and tax structure do not represent the entire aspects that affect the tax compliance behavior of SMEs. There are other aspects that could affect the tax compliance behavior of SMEs, such as cost of compliance, probability of detection, business ethics, and etc. The fourth limitation is that this study collected the data using a questionnaire, which covers the respondents' behavior based on their perceived frequency of their behavior and not account of the behavior themselves. This means that the data covers the respondents' perception of their behavior, which subjects it to orator's judgment. The last limitation is that there are some possibilities that the respondents did not understand some specific terms used within the questionnaire, which caused them to not fully understand the questionnaire. Here are some suggestions that this study can propose. For further researchers who wish to continue on this particular topic, the study can be developed by adding more variables that might have influence in the SME's tax compliance behavior. For practical purposes, if there are any changes in tax system or the tax regulations, the tax authorities should give more time and effort in conducting socialization programs on taxpayers, especially to SMEs. This is to ensure the full comprehension of properly preparing tax returns and understanding the issued tax regulations for SMEs. And that is all for my presentation. Thank you for your time and your attention.